All right, fascist Italy causes for the rise of fascism in Italy. Remember, it just become a nation, um, and a nation kind of that we saw go straight into some problems. And fascism usually takes advantage of crises. And one guy will kind of rise to the surface and say, hey, I can solve all your problems. In Italy's case, it's going to be Mussolini. In Germany's case, it's going to be Hitler. But fascism in Germany and Italy will be our next topics of discussion. And remember, you might always want to reference back that chart I made you where you're comparing communism and fascism because they have very different ideals and actually come to blows with each other. So our next two are fascist, and of course we've already covered a communist Russia. So in the early 20th century, Italy was a liberal state with civil rights and a constitutional monarchy. Remember, we have Victor Emmanuel the Third as our king on a constitutional monarchy. The Versailles Treaty of 1919, if you remember kind of where we left off, Italian nationalists were angry that Italy had not received any Austrian or Ottoman territory in the Italia Irredenta that Britain had promised them, or the Allies had promised them, or German African colonies that they've been promised. And the Prime Minister Orlando had angrily stomped out. We talked about during the Paris Peace Conference before it was completed. So they kind of have this negative view of the happenings after World War I. And then the Depression, not the Great Depression, but a depression will happen in 1919 that causes nationwide strikes and class tension in Italy. So you can see crises building. We're going to need someone to step up and say they have all the solutions. The wealthy classes, however, were very fearful of communist revolution. They don't want communists, the workers, to come take their things. So while they want some changes because things are in crises, they definitely aren't open to communism coming their way, such as Russia was open to communism. And they wanted a strong anti-communist leader. So by 1921, revolutionary socialists, conservatives, and property owners were all opposed to liberal parliamentary government. And so then the question is, if we're opposed to this, what direction do they go? And fascism is going to be the direction that they do. Italian fascism is kind of a mix between totalitarianism and conservative authoritarianism that we talked about in my introduction to totalitarianism. Not the same as Stalin. We're never going to see Mussolini reach the same extent as Stalin. Mussolini will always be in the shadow. I mean, even Hitler, who looked up to Mussolini at the beginning, will surpass Mussolini. And that's really, we'll talk about those reasons why. But the direction Italy's going to go is fascism. And fascism in Italy will eventually, as I said, be a combination of like conservative authoritarianism and modern totalitarianism. So we'll see to a lesser degree, although I mean, still a totalitarian fascist regime in many aspects. So that brings us to the guide, the answer, at least what Italy thought was the answer: Benito Mussolini, or Il Duce, which means the leader. So Il Duce, or Mussolini, although he was the editor of a socialist newspaper, he was at heart a nationalist, much more state first than workers first. Um, he is going to organize the fascist party by combining socialism and nationalism. We'll see socialism kind of get pushed to the side later, and primarily nationalism. He's going to base this on territorial expansion, benefits for workers, and land reform for peasants. Where fascism gets its name is the party was named after fasces, which are the rods that had once, you can see on the top of the picture here, had been carried by Roman officials as symbols of power. And so that's where fascism gets its name. Il Duce, or Mussolini, was also known for an essay he wrote, kind of as this editor of a socialist paper that was called The Doctrine of Fascism. And again, this is my time to remind you, look back at that chart. The Doctrine of Fascism is going to outline like all of those beliefs of fascism, and you'll see a lot of contradictions there with communism, as we've discussed before. Anyway, by 1920, Mussolini is going to gain support of the conservative classes. Uh, he had initially failed, but by 1920 he will gain support, and based on his aggressive nationalism and territorial expansion program. Also, on his platform of opposed to communism, he will get those conservative classes on his side. And then those that weren't on his side, he's going to frighten so much with anti-socialist rhetoric that they will come to decide, and he will soon abandon those socialist programs, as I said. He is known for saying he rejected all forms of previous forms or models of government, what he would call the isms of the 19th century, and he said that the 20th century political ideas pass, but nations stay. So he builds a very strong nationalist center here, a center of authority and the right. He would say that in the 19th century had been about individualism, while the 20th century is about collectivism, the state. He calls it the collective century. So he's able to keep his nationalism there while kind of pushing that initial socialism to the side. And even, fearing people away from it. And part of the way he's able to do this is through a group of squadrons, or really thugs, called the Black Shirts, or the Squadristi, which is a paramilitary force that he is going to use to attack communists, socialists, and other enemies of the fascist program. There will be a gentleman that kind of looks up to this Black Shirt kind of methodology, where if you can't get them to join you, then you are going to scare the crap out of them or attack them with guns and power, and that will be Hitler's later brown shirts. It's a way to quiet your enemies. Hitler at this stage kind of looks to Mussolini as a mentor, but as we'll talk later, he's going to surpass and even look down upon Mussolini later. But the black shirts are going to significantly undermine the stability of the government, however, because of their, having to use force, and it's not going to work with Stalin. Like, Stalin had this way, or work like Stalin. Stalin had this way of, like, starving 10 million people, but yet his picture was over the dinner table. It's not going to work that well for Mussolini. But anyway, Mussolini is going to orchestrate a march on Rome in October of 1922, in which he proclaims, "I am the answer," exactly how fascism comes to power, and it will lead to him taking power. He is going to demand the resignation on this march on Rome of existing government and his own appointment by the king. I think King Emmanuel is not really threatened by this. He really just looks at it as, I have a couple options. I can pick, this side, like the socialist worker side, which would probably rise up against him anyway. If you were following, should happen there and get rid of a government, or I can pick the fascist side. I don't think he's really threatened. He picks the fascist side when large groups of fascists march on Rome. Mussolini's demands are made. The government collapses. Mussolini receives the right to organize a new cabinet or government, and King Victor Emmanuel III gave him a dictatorial power for 1 year, and the nation's and to end the nation's social unrest. So he knows that there's going to be a civil war if I don't pick a side. He picks a side. It happens to be the fascist side, but our king is always going to be in the background here, kind of keeping Mussolini in check, where Stalin and Hitler are not going to have that. But he will also be appointed prime minister by the king at this point, and the youngest prime minister in Italy. So that leads us to the economy organization. We've talked about economy under Stalin. Now we're going to look at economy under Mussolini in Italy. So Mussolini's economic organization will be the corporate state, or the syndicalistic corporate system, and become his basis for Italian fascism. The quote, "everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state." So everything is in service to the state. Class transcends unity in favor of the state. It does allow for some capitalism, but only in service to the state. So state is the guiding force of everything. And then by 1928, all independent labor unions would be organized into government-controlled syndicates. It will establish organizations of workers and employers, outlaw strikes and walkouts, create corporations, which coordinated activities. Authority came down from the top, unlike socialist corporate states where workers made decisions. So fascism, not socialism. He's let that fall to the side. Mussolini then will also create a dictatorship through this economic program, through this total control or total service towards the state. The right to vote will be severely limited, so all candidates, I mean, really, you're only allowed to vote for certain candidates, or certain candidates are allowed to run and selected by the fascist party, so you really are going to get one party, the fascist party. The government will rule by decree, and if you didn't do what the government asks, then those black shirts are going to show up. Their mantra is mono frago, which means I don't give a damn. One of their favorite forms of punishment, if you didn't go what the government say, was to tie you to a tree and to pour a pint or two of castor oil down your throat and make you swallow a live toad or frog. So, yeah, no, I don't know how long it takes the frog to die, but no fun there. And they're going to start this kind of control even early in the school. So like we said, schooling was more to coerce people kind of this time, not always to make you intelligent, to be a good little fascist. So dedicated fascists will also be put in control of schools. Teachers had to take an oath of fascism. The great days of modern Italy will be taught that started on the day in March the day that the March on Rome happened in 1922, and that they will then hearken in, or Mussolini is going to hearken in the glory of the Roman Empire, and he is the only one that can bring it back, El Duce. We'll see a fascist youth movement is developed. Called the Balilla. There's a movie, if I get time to show it in class, I'll try to. But it tries to mold the youth into these young fascists. They take oaths, I believe, in Rome. Labor unions will be organized under, fascist movement. They'll even try to do the dope lavoro, or an after-work program, socialist activities in the evening for the working class. However, as I kind of previewed, Italy will never truly become a total totalitarian regime. Mussolini will never become all powerful because there's a king sitting in the background kind of keeping him in check. He will fail in his attempt to fascitize Italian society by controlling leisure time. His program is not successful, not like Stalin and Hitler will be, with their control of outside activities and the youth, etc. Old power structures of conservatives, military, and church will remain intact. Unlike Stalin and Hitler, Mussolini will never attempt to purge the conservative classes. He will propagandize and control labor, but left big business to regulate itself, unlike some other totalitarian regimes. And he will have no land reform, or no land reform will take place in his economic policy. And therefore he will not establish a ruthless police state. Compared to Stalin's millions that are killed, only 23 political prisoners will be executed between 1926 to 1944, and radical laws will not be passed until 1938. I think the OVRA, or the secret police of Mussolini, will only arrest 4,000, and 10 of those will be put to death. So savage persecution even of the Jews, which sometimes get put a lot more heavily on Italy, won't happen until late in World War II, when Italy was under German Nazi control. And then, I mean, that just shows how far Hitler's going to go beyond him. Not to say that Hitler is better, we're better with Hitler, but is going to exceed him in totalitarian control. Something we are going to follow, because AP Euro loves to focus on, is the differences in the treatment of women. So women in Italy, unlike in Russia, where there was a more modern approach to gender issues, Italy's social structure is going to emphasize a traditional role for women. It is that war is to the male what child rearing is to the woman, was kind of Mussolini's brand here. This will also become the case in Nazi Germany. So if you were asked to compare, an FRQ, you would put Nazi Germany and Italy together. Similar, Russia is different, modern. Divorce was abolished. So unlike Russia, women couldn't divorce in Italy, and told to stay home and procreate. In 1927, Mussolini created the Battle of the Births, is what he called it. He believed you needed to have a bigger population to be taken seriously or to be a threat, and so his goal was to have at least 5 children per family. In an attempt to promote marriage so that this would happen, Mussolini is going to decree a special tax on bachelors in 1934, and by 1938, women will be limited by law to a maximum of 10% of better paying jobs in industry and government. And so that is to really keep them at home where he would say their place is. He did meet and give like these awards to 93 moms who between them had 1,300 kids. So that is over 13 children each. So his program, although it's not going to fare to be totally successful, I guess, impressive. 93 moms, 1,300 kids. Um, but the real accomplishments under Mussolini are some things that are going to be a little more successful. Are going to be internal improvements made, such as electrification and road building. It's said that Mussolini made the trains run on time. There's that like control orderliness of fascism. He is going to have a more efficient government at the municipal or city level, not so much overall. And he is going to improve relations with the Catholic Church. He really had an option here. Do I work with or against the Catholic Church? And he really decides to work with the Catholic Church, even though there's been a break there since the unification of Italy and taking Venice and Rome. He decides he doesn't want to divide the Roman people over the church, so he doesn't want to have them say, oh, do I trust Il Duce or the church? Although, of course, he's going to put the state at the top, which we'll talk about some struggles there. So he wants the church to legitimize him, and so he's going to do all these things, like the baby stuff. Like the church wanted babies. He was against contraception. The church liked that. He bans divorce. The church likes that. So he does these things to kind of make the church approve. And this is where we'll get the latter impact of 1929, which resulted in a reconciliation with the papacy. In doing this, he recognizes the Vatican as a tiny independent nation or state, and the Vatican received $92 million for seized church lands that took place during the unification. In return for this, Pope Pius XII will recognize the legitimacy of Mussolini's fascist state. So it's kind of, here's what I'm giving you, quid pro quo, here's what you give me. However, we'll see that it's not always harmonious between the church and Mussolini, because he will put the state above the church. I mean, he's nationalist, state fascist, but we will see a reconciliation here. So that's kind of some of the accomplishments. Now let's get into the failures or the fascist legacy under Mussolini. Okay, so Italian democracy will be destroyed due to Mussolini's fascism. We'll also see terrorism will become a state policy. So these are kind of the failure legacies of fascism in Italy. Poor industrial growth due to his focus on militarism and colonialism is going to occur, and disastrous wars will result from the attempt to recapture imperialistic glories of ancient Rome. So this, like, trying to get out and take the lands and find the glory of Rome will also cause a series of wars that are going to hurt Italy. And we'll see in World War II, as we come to the end of that next week, that Mussolini's going to end up hanged upside down at a gas station with his mistress. But we'll get to that after we confront Nazi Germany, get ourselves into World War II, and knock it out of the park really quick. And so that's where we'll pick up tomorrow. And keep on trucking on. I'll see you in class.